be a different history in politics today. Um, One thing I don't want to do, and I know it's history and politics, but so much of the politics today is around race. And today, even I don't feel like talking about race. Now, watch me spend the next 20 minutes talking about race. But I sincerely don't want to. But how can we? Um, I I have found as I have begun developing more colleagues at the PhD level, um, other professors that are well-meaning people. Um, they have no outward signs of race or racial bias. Let me put it like that: racial bias or discriminatory agendas. All right, but they don't see certain things. They do not see how the law is applied differently. They function from a place that the European or white perspective is the American perspective. Perfect example. If the police arrest somebody, they must have done something wrong. That is generally the reaction of American white people. So they side with law enforcement, black or white. The gentleman who was beaten to death by black police officers, black man beaten to death by black police officers, was tried in an area, not where it happened, but in a mostly white area. Now, it's black men beating a black man. And you have 5 trained men that cannot subdue one man without killing him. That's problematic. Okay. Especially if it's resulting from something that is not life. You know, this is an active shooter or something like that. This is a traffic stop. This is an interaction of trespass. This is not a life-threatening situation where it is logical to deduce that this is going to result in a death. And just like with Rodney King being tried in Simi Valley as opposed to downtown LA, when they went to this all-white area, the police get off. Now, some of my colleagues see this situation as, see, there's no racism. They let these black officers off. There's no bias. Because the ideology is the police are who come to help. That is not the inner city black ideology. Police officers are not our friends. Police officers don't come to help. Black people generally, inner city, poor black people, do not call the police to help. They call the police to sick the police on somebody. The police in the inner city black area is a weapon. They're either a weapon for the state, i.e., the 60s or any type of racial anti-segregation, Jim Crow, all of these things were enforced by police. It was police that had the dogs and the batons and the water hoses during the 60s. So they have always been the enforcement of the state's agenda against black people. Even when black people were not being violent, even when black people were not rioting, even in the most peaceful protests, Selma, that's who's been the weapon of the state. Okay. I try to use the 60s because if I go back too far to slavery, people say, oh, they're bringing up slavery, and they stop listening. But in looking at that case in Cincinnati, where the mostly white jury let off these black officers, which I find each of those black officers' actions deplorable and despicable, it shows that there is a lack of broad American vision. It is very narrow when it comes to American white people. The name of the Washington Commanders before it was changed into the 20th century, we had a team named after a minority group's skin. Now, there have been respectful depictions of Native Americans as a team representative or mascot. You had the Seminoles, you had the Braves. They worked with the indigenous people to make sure that that their representations were respectful and everything. But this was something for decades. Native Americans were saying, that's out of line. That would be equivalent to the Washington former name, and Native Americans would be equivalent to a team named the Delaware Darkies with a lawn jockey as their mascot. Everybody would go, oh my God, that's terrible. But this was my problem. Black folk didn't say nothing about that NFL team. Why? Because like whites, we are as American as anybody else, and we see what's important to us. Now, that was because specifically we have been taught not to see Native Americans at all, which is horrible, but it's true. So, but generally, black folk have this rainbow coalition. If you look at the Panthers' work, if you look at Dr. King's work, if you look at the Rainbow Coalition in Chicago under Jesse Jackson, it was always about a coalition of impoverished and oppressed, as opposed to our agenda first. But in this particular case, with these police officers in Cincinnati, it illustrated that these lawyers moved the case to where the agendas are in their favor. Now you can say that's smart lawyering, but at the same time, you can gain all the riches, but if you lose your soul, have you really maximized your life? But it's really strange how we all can be Americans and they could not fathom that these are trained, professional men, five of them, added to a pattern of unarmed black deaths by this trained group of people. The white mindset is if the police did it, it must have been within their purview. And how can we be that far apart, understanding black people don't feel safe around the police? It doesn't matter how much money we have. It doesn't matter what jobs we have. It doesn't matter what titles we have. Because historically and traditionally, we do not have the political power or privilege to have our perspectives considered. So, as I talked for about race for 12 minutes, after I said I didn't want to, um, I'm looking at our opening of the year under Trump. And I'm interested to see the whole 4 years. Um, I I don't know if the economy is as bad. Sometime I hear the economy is bad, but I'm not hearing it as devastatingly as it's like it could be political spin. I cannot say I have necessarily felt it. I mean, I feel the prices, but I'm not suffering. So I can't say that, by the time it hits me, it's pretty bad. Okay. But I do know the history of tariffs, and I see him pulling back on that. Now he's negotiating. Um, I am, I'm not surprised that the agendas that are coming out of the Project 2025, this is a white America thing. This is not a Republican thing. Democrats did the same thing in 1994. And then the Republicans did it before them in the early 80s with the war on drugs. The 1994 was, of course, marking the official beginning of mass incarceration. Early 80s, of course, was the war on drugs. And 20 years before that was obviously the civil rights movement. So there's always been this proverbial white political thumb on the necks of black people. There's never been that period of reclamation, nor is there a desire for it to be. And that's what is being said now, but it is under a president who is saying it, which can be, in my opinion, respected a lot more. Because as much as people are complaining about MAGA, complaining about, I almost said Bush, complaining about Trump, as far as the black community, stop. You can see the pitches coming in slowly now. They're telling us exactly what they're doing. We already know why. Stop complaining and start planning. So, okay, we're moving back to the 1960s. Politically, economically, socially. Okay. We were having a revolution in the 60s, trying to figure out our best plan. And we had a bunch of plans on the table. We had Garveyism, we had Pan Africanism, we had um, the civil rights non resistance, we had the Nation of Islam. We had a lot of things going on, right? And each of them had their successes and each of them had their failures. But if we know the playbook they're going back to, we know what worked then and we know what didn't work. We can fix what didn't work and return to that 1960s mindset of Black nationalism that Malcolm X was talking about. And Black nationalism has nothing to do with the dislike of white people, because white America thinks everybody thinks like white America historically has thought. Me getting something means you don't get something. Because if I get it, I'm going to protect it. I'm going to protect it by law. I'm going to protect it by violence. I'm going to protect it by culture. I'm going to protect it by tradition. I'm going to protect it through economics. That's the historic mindset of American whites, and that's the American way. Historically, that's just not anything up for debate. That's not what that means for us. What that means for us is that we control politics, economics, job opportunities, education, housing in our communities. Our leadership and our organizations working toward the betterment of us, because the legislation is already in place. That's something that happens historically, that American whites judge the reaction of Black people. When Malcolm X said, if whites are attacking you, defend yourself. Oh, you're preaching hate. You completely missed the fact that the requisite was defense, which means you have to offend. Defense is not equal to offense. That's not hate, that's self-preservation. So make it clear that the dominant political voice and populace is saying we are removing anti-discrimination policy within the state and private sector, which means we can decide if we discriminate or not. And if we go by history, this group discriminates. So our response is controlling these resources in our neighborhoods, strategically doing business that keeps our group in a good financial, political, and economic position. Because the dominant group is passing legislation with a slogan that says we're going back to take away to the time that we took away from this group. Yet they paid the same amount of taxes as the group that's not being taken away from. There's not a time in American history that any economic system did not discriminate to the detriment of the black community. There's not been a period. Um, there may be an instance, but not a period. What we are responding to or preparing for is what they've already done. So this is not a call for hate or dislike. This is understanding history, understanding your opponent, and seeing what's happened around you. When we heard of the war on drugs, that particular oppression had never occurred before. So we didn't know what was coming. But this, we know what's coming. We know what's coming. They've already removed the anti-discrimination laws. And now they're going back to the 1994 crime bill to empower policing, and we know where that goes. Now they can say the rhetoric is the same, but it's full of a lot of political dog whistles and double language. Please look up Lee Atwater's interview with Playboy magazine if you think that there is not double language used in Republican politics in particular, but it's the same thing with Democrats. It is no difference. This is a American white control. That's like saying, would you rather me hit you with this hand or this hand? I don't like you. Would you rather me hit you with this hand, which is a Republican, or I can hit you with this hand, which is a Democrat? That doesn't mean it's still connected to the person that doesn't like you. So how we are choosing one or the other, because think about it. We've been able to vote for 160 years. It is 2025. The 13th Amendment was passed in 1865. The 14th Amendment was passed in 1868. And the 15th Amendment, the right for black people to vote, was passed in 1870. That is 160 years ago. Name one thing black people have gotten exclusively from voting. Not to mention, after 1870, black people still could not vote unencumbered for 95 years. And white women could not vote at the same time either. But in 1920, white women got to vote by passage of the 19th Amendment. And what did they do when they got the right to vote? After they had banned with Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman, white women spent the next 45 years fighting for black women not to get the right to vote after they used them to bulk up their numbers in the suffrage movement. Now, this is just United States history. Like it, don't like it, you cannot disprove it. As much as I just didn't feel like talking about race today, I can't talk about MAGA, Trump, referendums that have came out the last 4 months without it.